Circular Industries talks. And today we are really happy to have with us Sicco Santema. Sicco is a professor in responsible marketing and consumer behavior at the Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering at TU Delft. And he is specialized in smart traveling, flying, multimodal journeys, and plane and train interfaces. And he will be talking about, well, the title on the slide is Connecting Circularity, but there's also a topic that was given to us, and that is Sustainalizing Aviation Waste, Weight, and Well-being.
Yeah.
So without further ado, I would like to give you the floor, Sicco.
Thank you very much, René, for this. Yeah. My name is Sicco Santema, and just to introduce it a bit further, the department I work for is responsible marketing, so that's correct. And my chair is specifically aimed at, you see it here, networked innovation and design. So I usually look at situations from a supply chain perspective, so suppliers and sub-suppliers and customers and users and words like that. And while I was preparing this meeting, I thought it might be better, or at least for me, it is time to, from operationalizing, to go back a bit more in the theoretical background of it. So I thought let's make this a bit more philosophical presentation on the why I'm doing this and what the basic ideas behind it, or obstructions or barriers and enablers are to connect to the specific aviation situation that you mentioned, René. And then in the end, I will tell something about the waste, weight, and well-being program as a form of sustainalizing. But that's examples and operations in the aviation sector. A bit further on my private situation. I live in Utrecht, in the center of the Netherlands, and I have 4 daughters. So I always say I can handle any question on any time, in any tone. As an example, that please interrupt me as much as possible. If you have ideas, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat. René will have a look at it and I will react to it, or say, let's wait a little bit till I'm further. But let's make it as lively as possible through the Teams chat as an example, and then we'll see. Okay. Yeah. Just to, I introduced this a little bit, and I've looked at some of the earlier presentations, and I thought these are very much into the sustainability and circularity. Let's go back a bit more in why we are doing things. We are doing it at the current moment. So I would like to tell something about transaction-based economy, or transaction cost economics, and then also ask a question to you when I'm done. Do you buy this? Do you believe this? And if you do, could this be a direction forward to set up or even further develop the research from a more academic perspective? And I will talk about supply chain silos. We can all read, and I just said it. One new thing is that I think that we relate to each other on the business perspective in economic way. We relate to each other on what's called the independency theory. In other words, me, myself, and I versus the rest of the world. And elements of that is that we write a yearly report on our own activities as a company. We don't do that on networks or supply chains, and I think that we need that for circularity. And later on, I will come back to CSRD as well, because I have a lot of faith in CSRD as an enabler to make the relations across the supply chain. In one of the earlier presentations, I saw that somebody talked about the butterfly diagram of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I will focus in the red thing, and it's specifically made red because I think there's a cause in there. In supply chain is particularly linear. So we do supply chain thinking in a linear way from suppliers to end customers and users. And what I like to try is in this presentation to show that we need something to change in the way we work together to be able to come into the recycling, remanufacture, and all the other re's in there. Yeah, enough for introduction. Thanks, René, for.
It's always, yeah, it's always kind of odd to have this blank screen in front of you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the basic of transaction cost economics is that from the supply side, from one of the companies in the supply chain, you see here a figure that we want to sell something to the next one in the chain. We call that sales. It's very simple. We call it supply. And the idea, we train marketing and salespeople to sell as much as possible. So I always say it's more. That's the clue for salespeople, and that's the sales perspective. And we report that in the yearly reports. You can hear it all the time. Every day there are companies presenting their yearly report, and the first thing they talk about is their turnover and turnover increase. The other side is obviously in the supply chain is the perspective of the customer. And they call their relations with their supplier, they call it purchasing. And the main objective of purchasing is lower. So they say it has to be cheaper, quality has to be lower, less volume, things like that. So now we are in the typical supply chain relationship where the supplier says, I want you to buy more. And the purchasing for the next one in the chain says, I want you to be cheaper, lower volume, lower quality, and stuff like that. And then it gets even worse because then we close contracts between it. So we make flexible situations or changing, or now we talk about VUCA, versatile, uncertain, and so forth situations, and we put a fixed contract in there. If you look at governments, for instance, and if they tender things, like the current example of the Brinoord Bridge, and they say, well, this is the contract, this is what you got to do, and please deliver. That means that the expertise on what is delivered by the suppliers is lost by the specifications of the customer. And well, this one should, there it is. So I use this picture very much, and it's the wrong one talking, because if the customer is telling the supplier what to do, what is typical in supply chain thinking, what will happen? What will you do at home if your partner talks all the time that you have to do the dishwashing, clean up, make up your bed and do stuff? What will happen? You move away, right? And you just stop talking and you just do what is asked, because you want the supplier, you want the customer to buy your stuff, because sales was about more. And we call this the effect of expertise loss, because funnily enough, you need this particular supplier to supply goods and services to you. There's a question?
No, I think there was just an open mic, but I muted that participant.
I like open mics, yeah. And what we try to achieve is we think from a quality perspective, an expertise perspective, that the expertise lies with the suppliers. Also, if we talk about reuse and recycling, you need the supplier to take the goods and the goods back and reuse it or remanufacture it in their own production system. Yeah. So why will I tell him make a transaction, have a contract? I think that is elements of the transaction cost economics that is very much blocking the potential benefits of circularity in the supply chain. And you see it happening all the time. For the lawyers in the audience, it means that the ownership of products and services is transferred to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And yeah, I will play around with the ownership later on. Okay, next subject is that if we go into organizations or into departments, we see, I call that the silo-based organizations. And so also if I look in my own department in the TU Delft, careers are made within the departments. And directions and reporting and stuff are in a particular department, right? So if we do it like this, it is very focused. And if we then look at organizations, so look at industrial design engineering, we have 3 departments where people work in their own silos. We have a bookkeeping or administrative departments that work on figures and finances, not with us, but within their own silo. And educational department, they organize the educational program, not including us, because they simply do that as a task in their own activity. So here the thing, and if I take here the airline and the passenger and so, and the pilots and the catering and the engineering maintenance of aircraft, here we saw the weight, waste, and well-being. So as long as we purchase lunches or food and drinks, food and beverage in the aircraft from a planning department relating to the catering services, we will bring planned stuff into the aircraft and see what is used while we are flying. That means that all the trolleys are very full with all kinds of stuff that's not used while you fly, because we don't ask the passengers what they want to eat and drink before they are in the aircraft, right? And my assumption is that as long as we have these silo-based organizations, we don't have goods and services floating through, in this particular case, departments. Now, let's then look at supply chains. Then it gets a bit messy, because now organizations are going to work with each other. Again, the food and beverage example, the order of KLM for food and beverage for a certain flight, let's say to Atlanta in America, is ordered. And then internally in the catering service, there is a production line, which actually is a production line that looks like a car manufacturing production line. And somebody is doing there only the salad all the time, because she is working in the silo salad making. And there's no connection whatsoever with the end user later on. So here you see that I think that this is the way we operate and the way we organize our networks is very messy, and it makes it very messy. Well, if I simplify that and make it a 3-party supply chain, that is much easier to look at it. You see it all the time, and all the transactions I was talking about, they take place in these organizations. I put the OEM in here, that's the original equipment manufacturer. I use this model a lot with the current Boeing examples. Who is responsible for one of these panels falling off the aircraft? And in my thinking, I always say the supplier. because they should know, or they know how to mount it and how to keep it on the airplane for a longer period of time. In the way Boeing operates, they think they are responsible. By the way, the airlines think that they are responsible, and lately I saw an article where the statement was made that even the passenger is responsible because he shouldn't fly with Boeing. So if you go in a Boeing aircraft while you travel, you can have these things can happen. So this just to illustrate how messy it can get if you take all the parties in the current way of working. Any questions so far?
I don't see any hands raised or any comments in the chat at the moment.
All right. And I make 7 typos, so here's one I see now. It's supply chain. Okay. Just to give some examples, the wholesale, this is a picture from the Corona time, but as long as we have supermarkets in the supply chain and it's a specific pushed way of large worldwide manufacturing pushing their goods and services into the supermarket, and an unknown buyers are there and they take it home, how can I make that circular? So the supermarkets simply don't have a possibility to take things back. It's not particularly true because the statiegeld, I don't know the English word, and we bring back bottles and cans and so on, and so it is possible, but they don't like it. It's not in their business model. This is the new office of RIVM here next where I live, and building that. We're building, and that's the time aspect in there. It is built for, let's say, 25 or 50 years. So how on earth are you going to make this circular in the building material, not knowing what will happen between now and 25 or 50 years? So this is for me a very good example on this supply chain thinking in building a house, bringing all the material in there, mount it or fix it or leave it there, and then the ownership is transferred from all the builders to RIVM, and it is lost. And here you have a big tunnel. This is about the tunnel next to Leiden, connecting 2 highways. Yeah, and then it's there underground. Who is the owner, and who is there in 25, 50 years if we want to change that, right? Well, how can we solve it? One of the examples we did it. It's just a shipbuilding example, and it's a large cruise ship, but that's just because it looks funny. But in general, shipbuilder, and we used 30,000 orders to produce a ship like this. So also again here, how the idea is how can you make it circular if you have to deal with 30,000 orders in a pushed into the new ship? So we thought, why don't we group these suppliers, and we have all the steel manufacturing, so the basis of the ship and the roofs and stuff and the installation, and make the installer responsible for taking all the cables, and it's thousands of kilometers of cables in the ship. Make him somehow responsible for taking it back. So we don't talk about circularity of the ship in this particular case, but you try to reduce the complexity to make the installer the circular party of what he installed, to make it simpler. And by doing that, we reduced the number of orders of the total ship from 30,000 to 1,500. So you still could say that is a lot, and that's a lot to deal with, but it at least is 1/20, so it's much less. It also means that you accept as a shipbuilder that you build, and I come back to that, you build it with a few partners instead of all the numbers of suppliers at the early stages of the supply chain. I heard another example of this mechanism lately, where if you look at the RAI, the exhibition organization in Amsterdam, the RAI, for one very large exhibition, on yearly basis, they have about 40,000 movements of trucks in front of the exhibition hall to build all the stands. And that's a pushed way of doing it as well. So they build the stands and bring all the stuff to that. And every stand is built by a separate contractor. And also here, we tried to reduce the number of truck movements. And also there, you can reduce it to, in the most extreme theoretical way, from 40,000 to some 3,000 movements. Think about the environmental effect of that number of trolley movement or lorry movements all the time. Going back to the aviation example, why don't we relate the catering company to the activities on board, or even relate them to the actual passenger? And that we learned that from the McDonald's model. Might be not the best example for circularity, but they relate very much the end consumer to all the products they order. You can do that, especially talking about data, you can use the cash register for doing that. Okay, so what's next? We call it faster, cheaper, better, but what we would like is to relate the suppliers through the integrator, that could be Boeing or McDonald's or the supermarket, to the end customer. And here you see the value they create in a classic economic sense. And what you want is that you report back and pay back the money involved and all the market information, so that they can produce what is actually used in the end customer. Sounds very theoretical. It probably is also that. So I come back to the CSRD. Here I created the swap feeds example, and I reckon that everybody knows what swap feeds is. And why don't you have swap wheel as a supplier, swap frame, swap tire, swap finance, swap repair? And if we create that, then the man in the middle, or the company in the middle of swap feeds, becomes the service provider and relates the users of the bikes to the original suppliers. And in that particular case, sorry, how did I do that? Sorry. This was a recap. Now we relate in this simple example, we relate the suppliers to the actual end user. So you can imagine that either through the service provider or directly, if a wheel is broken, you bring it back to supplier swap wheel, who is able to deal with the reusable parts, or even the remanufacturing of using the base materials. I call that create dependency. So now we make the supplier dependent on the usage in the market and relate and make it circular with them instead of with the organization in the middle. You saw that I believe that CSRD, so the directive from the EU on corporate social responsibility, because now, and I'm working for I'm in the non-executive board of one of the large companies who have to do this. Now we can actually report on, we have to report on, as we take the integrator as an example, they have to report on what's happening on the ESG, so on the environmental, social, and governance structure at their suppliers and at their customers. So now we have to report on, like a yearly report, in what is our customer doing with our products and services. And we also have to report what is put into it from the supplier perspective. Funny thing is, if we move this thing to the customer organization in a business-to-business setting, they also have to report on their CSRD reporting, what this particular integrator is doing and what their suppliers is doing. So I put this as a opportunity for circularity, because now I hope that there will be much more transparency in supply chain on what's happening where and why it's contributing to the end value in the chain, but also how much is actually put back in the supply chain. So there were my green arrows in the butterfly diagram from the supply chain perspective. No questions, René, still? Everybody is silent?
Yes.
Okay. Nice. No, or not. And this is a very common model in business planning, the business model canvas. And I like to put that in this perspective in there, because it's a three-party system. So it's very easy and very simple to use. But again, you see here on the right side, you see the customers, and on the left side, you see the key partners. And the main value proposition is built by the OEM or the integrator in the network. So I use this thinking of the business model canvas a lot to illustrate how the circularity can take place and how money is not only streaming from the partners to the customers, but also goods and services and their value can flow back into the supply chain, and particularly here float back to the key partners. So if we take the food and beverage example for aviation, the catering companies are responsible for filling the trolleys, and we simply bring back everything in the trolley to the catering company to handle whatever is put in there. And we pay them only for what's used. So they are not paid for filling the trolley, but paid for what's actually used by the customers. And then money terms, they will lose money if things are brought back. So if you think from that, from circular or from value creation, I think that is simple and that is easy to reach and do in current practice. All right. This is one of my favorites, this picture. To the right, the classic is the above three monkeys. We're fighting for margins and fighting for innovations and fighting amongst each other because silos and silo reporting is happening in there. And I'm advocating much more that customers and suppliers and sub-suppliers cooperate and work together in innovations and then work also together in getting the value out to the market. Currently, I work for the Gasunie, who is applying this particular in the energy transition project, and they actually are applying this bottom two model. Is that they, as a Gasunie, is a big provider of projects to their suppliers, the constructing firm and the engineering firms. And now they cooperate with each other, not in the transaction modus, but in the total amount of work they have to do to get the transition going. And you see more of these models in companies like Tenet and Alliander, specifically in the Netherlands, to make the energy transition possible. So dependency and cooperation for me is an area to look into the answers we can formulate for circularity, also in the butterfly model. To conclude, you can all read, but I think I made clear that at least for me, silos is a blocking mechanism, and also transactions and transaction cost economics is educating us to make profit in my silo and don't care about suppliers nor about customers. The time axis, I gave the example of the RIVM building. If time between producing and delivering goods and end of use is very, very long, I think it is very hard to make reconnections. CSRD will help. Well, you can all read, and dependency is one of my favorite. So this is what I wanted to tell René. Thank you for the time and thank you for listening up to now. But I hope to get a lot of questions or disagreement. I like disagreements because then we start a discussion, hopefully, the academic transition. And I try to be as black and white as possible. So there will probably be room for nuances. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sicco. I'll give you a real hand. There might be some virtual hands, and yeah, please, if you have questions, open your mic or add something in the chat. I will be looking at both. Maybe I can start the discussion off and kick the discussion off with a question. So, Sicco, you were talking a lot about the silos within companies, which are problematic if you want to move to a more circular economy perspective. I'm wondering, so what is the strategy to get rid of these silos? So how do you get rid of these silos, and what would a company look like if these silos are broken down, connected? How should you do it, and what would it look like?
Yeah, the typical instrument we use in industrial design engineering is we build journeys. So if you take a passenger or a traveler, you can easily make the journey from home to destination. And then if we take again where you started in the introduction, if you take flying, it is very clear that that's only a very small part, or it's a part of the total journey. So I have to take my bike to the bus station, to the train station, to the airport, then fly. And then I take train, taxi, Uber, or whatever to the final destination. And by looking at that, we learned that 1/3 of the passengers is eating in the journey, but not particularly in the aircraft. So that changes the idea of supplying food to the passenger by KLM as an example. That is not necessarily the best place to do that in the aircraft. But you can also give them something to eat while they are moving towards the airport, as an example. Or if they have to be 2 hours in advance at the airport, why don't you provide meals while they are at the airport? And then
is that something that is done now, or?
Yeah, we're actually doing that in practice. A very simple example is, why don't you put a bowl with water bottles, small water bottles, next to the gate? And to the after you have done your check, your boarding check, you can pick a bottle of water. How simple can it be?
Yeah.
And then you don't need, especially for European or shorter flights, you don't need to take a whole lot of water to the aircraft as a provider, as KLM, because it's already done on the ground and the passenger brings it itself. When we did this test, a lot of passengers showed their own bottles. They already filled with normal water in the airport, so they're carrying their own bottles already, like we do in the train. So then now the discussion with KLM is, why do you think that you add value to the passenger if you provide them meals? And that's very nasty question, because there's a whole silo responsible for providing meals.
Probably would even be better to just have a tap there, right? Instead of the bottles.
There are taps in the airports.
Yeah, in the airport, but I think if you would have that, let's say in the waiting room just before the boarding,
Yeah,
that would,
good example. Yeah.
Um,
So we try to do it with easy things like this.
Yeah.
To get the mindset on, and the reaction of KLM is, but then I'm responsible, then I'm dependent on the airport to provide this water.
Yeah.
Yeah. What the heck?
Yeah.
Be dependent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Peter, you raised your hand.
I'm looking to the right. Sorry for that. It's because somehow the slide, you are there and my camera is here. So, Peter.
I read a book of Thomas Rau, Material Matters.
Yes.
And he also presents there some ideas about products instead, services instead of products. And he then explores what happens if you, instead of buying a lamp, you buy light.
Yes.
And you are familiar with these ideas?
Yes.
How? What are your ideas add to these concepts?
My answer would be human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I will explain that a bit more.
Yes, please.
The latest building is Triodos Bank in Driebergen, as an example of Thomas Rau. You take the facade there, which is glass, and it's totally removable and reusable again. So it's the facade is built there independently from the building, sort of. Right? You know that example, I think. Yeah.
Yes, it's also in the book.
Okay. The producer of it, and now I forgot the name, Mickey, a former professor of architecture. But the producing company there, I work together with them, that they will stay the owner of the facade for 25 years. And the Triodos Bank is renting the facade. And you can, so it becomes a lease model or a pay-per-use or kind of model. That hasn't happened in practice because the time of the material being there was too long to get it financed. And a very typical thing is that anything that you mount fixed to a building becomes the owner of the building will own that particular material as well. So there was a specific juridical law situation where it was simply not possible to arrive at that position. Right. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question. You were asking for possibilities, but here you see a big barrier, a very practical barrier. We had the same with the ship. Ship is a registered good, so everything that you mount on the ship becomes falls in the ownership of the actual owner later on. There you see the split of as soon as the one that's owning it is responsible, and therefore you lose the contact with the original supplier, who is the expert in the Triodos building example, the glass facade. Yeah.
You also indicated
we need to change something there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You also mentioned human behavior. Can you tell a bit more how also human behavior affects these kind of transactions?
Again, an example here is take business class passengers for an aircraft. The behavior is that they are the first to enter the aircraft. And I still don't know why that is a perk, but somehow it is there. We originated many years ago, where we treated business class passengers better or are different or and they are used to it. So they behave like it. So we did trials where we said, why don't we keep the business passengers in the lounge as long as possible, and feed and give them something to drink, the champagne or whatever they get if in the aircraft, while they are still there. So imagine that we do the entrance of the aircraft and all the activities, we do it in the lounge. And then as late as possible, we say, well, you are in front of the aircraft, so as late as possible, now you can go to the aircraft and enter it, and the aircraft takes off. And the majority of the business class people said, no, we don't want that. We are important and we want to be the first to go into the aircraft, which is a lovely example of, well, built-in human behavior. And can we change that? Yes, of course, we can change that. We have to pay for luggage, which 12 years ago was not happening, for instance. So yes, we can change it, but we need a first mover in the business who says, well, we are going to change it. And then business class is not the best example, because we learned that the business class seats are so very, very, very polluting in their weight and in everything they use. So we should all fly like Ryanair. Only economy class is better. If you accept flying, it's better for the environment than flying around with business class passengers. But okay, that's another.
Okay, thank you.
It's the supermarket example is a lot of behavior. Why don't we bring back the boxes and the plastic and everything we now throw away in the containers? Why don't we simply bring it back? And you see examples happening. There is people bringing back their packaging material to the supermarket. Say, hey, it's your problem. Good luck with it. But in general, we don't do that. Yeah, two examples. Does that work?
Yes, a little. And I think your remark helped that bringing the suppliers in contact to the customers opens opportunities for innovation.
Yeah. Yeah, to add a little bit on that, I fully agree with that, because as long as we train the catering people to pack a dessert in a big wrap of plastic and put a dessert on every tray, because that's how they, in their silo, get what their KPI is, they will keep on doing it and think that that's very good, because their bosses tell them to do it, right? If you know that 50% of the desserts are not eaten and not touched, so in the specific Atlanta route, Schiphol Atlanta, you see 50% of the desserts are untouched. Think about it. Why do we do it? And so actually we have to feed it back to the one that produces it and say, hey, guy, you're doing a stupid job instead of a great job.
Okay, thank
All
you. Halil, you raised your hand.
Yes, I would like to thank you for your nice presentation, also giving the exact answer why the airline companies should do what they are for. That's to help passengers to move from A to B and not provide them with meals, etc. You gave exactly the right answer on Ryanair, because from as I understood from research, it's known that KLM doesn't make the right profit or high profit per seat. So there's a long way to go for KLM. So yeah, thank you for providing us this insightful information. But can you also comment on the cost reduction or time reduction or any other numbers related to these services?
Yeah. Also, an example might help. The typical result of transaction-based operations between a supplier and an integrator is stocks. like you see in the supermarket. So there's a lot of goods in the supermarket laying around there for waiting for a potential customer not known. So you see a lot of stocks, and then if you go into risk management, they tell you that you need outgoing stocks from sales perspective, because there might be an opportunistic customer who wants to buy and you have to supply directly. The same holds from purchasing perspective. They say, I want to have incoming stock because that makes me independent from my supplier. What we know from stocks is that every month or every 6 weeks, they become, I don't know the English word. Can you help, René? Incourant.
Oof.
But they become old.
Yeah.
So the date of usage for in the supermarket again, the latest date for usage before, as an example, comes closer by if you put it. So if goods are in the stocks for 6 months, all very general figures, of course, the chance that it's not going to be sold or used anymore is 50%, somewhere around that. So think about it. The time aspect, the silo independency thinking says from sales perspective, I need stocks, and from purchasing perspective, I need stocks. And you know that over time, it becomes irrelevant for production or for eating or usage. So we have to rethink stocks as an answer to your question. And obviously, smartification and data and exchange will help. Now, to make it very practical, if I know what the passengers in an aircraft are going to eat, and because I asked them to pre-order, I make it digital, and I can share the pre-order information with the catering company who only supplies what is actually ordered. I don't have stocks, and it don't get off over time and things like that. But it needs to stop independence thinking, because if I share the information of my markets with my supplier, classically, the competition-based theories say, well, then my supplier will go to the market itself. From a circularity perspective, that's wonderful, of course, because the actual adding value of this man in the middle is not there anymore. But the structure still is very classical and is still there. Does that answer your question also a bit?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was also wondering about the example that you gave about swap feeds. And I think there's a clear business model there, especially in large cities where getting your bike stolen, etc. That's really an issue. So I think as a business model, it really works, because I think it offers some let's say, yeah, some advantages, let's say, on top of owning your own feeds. But to what extent is it? I mean, circularity, in my view, is a means to an end, and the end is sustainability. But to what extent do you think that swap feeds is actually creating environmental gains with their business model?
At the current moment, they don't. It's an example of servitization of a classic industry.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of selling bikes, you rent them. So I think the clearest answer on that part is they don't. But my suggestion is to integrate the typical suppliers into the business model and relate the wheel supplier to the bike user.
Yeah.
And make them responsible for long-lasting wheels, which is contributing to the sustainability. So the current quality of the wheels is such that it will break down in 1 year time. If we can lengthen that to 3 years, it's already better for the environment.
Yeah.
And if they then are willing to take back all the material, at least, or the reusable parts, and work it into the new wheels, or the new base material where they produce the wheels from, will also make that they use reusable, recyclable, or reusable materials.
Yeah, because I also am indeed. So I agree with you. I think there is very little environmental gain, especially also because what you can also see happening is the process of I think the Americans call it "don't be gentle, it's a rental."
Yeah.
That type of thing is often also happening, right? People don't really care about this hired bike because, well, why would they? They can just get a new one if it's broken or whatever. And therefore, I think in the end, the environmental gain is non-existent, or actually, well, the opposite is probably true. Yeah.
Yeah, they pay for it. So their money terms will help to be a bit more gentle with the rental. But I use the example for the relationship to the earlier parties in the supply chain.
Yeah, yeah.
They are responsible for their customers not being gentle with their product.
Yeah.
I'm back to the question on customer behavior, or in this case, the people in the supplier organization's behavior.
Yeah.
They will react. They say, "Hey, we don't want to supply these customers anymore."
Yeah.
So this "don't be gentle with the rental" is a typical effect in all these constructions and all the servitization constructions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And therefore, it is more expensive to lease something than to own something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly true. Yeah. Okay. I don't see any further questions. I don't see any further hands raised. So yeah, with this, I think I would just like to thank you again, Sicco, for sharing your ideas and your insights with us today.
Okay.
Yeah, and to the audience, just like to say, well, thanks for joining, and hope to see you next time.
Yeah, and if you want, if somebody wants to react or give feedback, I'm very welcome, because I always say I also don't necessarily know what I'm talking about, but I feel that there's something in there. That's the scientific question. What am I doing? So if somebody is willing to give some feedback, very welcome. Please do so.
Thank you. Thanks again. See you.
Bye bye.
Have a nice day.